presentation today. I'll be talking about Baron von Steuben, an American icon. So a little bit about him. Baron von Steuben was a Prussian officer. He came over to the United States and formed pretty much the backbone of the American military. And he deserves to be recognized as the icon he is. So his life can be divided into three main stages: his life before the war, his time at Valley Forge, and his post-war. So, Baron von Steuben was born in Magdeburg, Germany, but this time Magdeburg and Germany didn't exist as a full state. It was called the Holy Roman Empire, and his city had been taken over by a country called Prussia. Now, the Prussians formed from a combination of the Catholic Teutonic Order, which was like the Templar Knights, kind of, and the city of Brandenburg, which is where the Brandenburg Gates come from, and eventually would turn into the city of Berlin. Prussia would form the state of Germany later. So pretty much his entire childhood he was in war. When he was young, his dad was lent by the Prussian army to the Russians, and he served in the Crimean Peninsula. At 14 was when he first served as an actual soldier with a musket and rifle in the War of the Austrian Succession. And when he wasn't fighting, he was educated at a Catholic military school, even though the entire country was Protestant, because at this time the Catholic schools were much more advanced than the Protestant schools. So as soon as he graduates school, he becomes a second lieutenant in the Prussian army, and he'll serve as the right-hand man to the King of Prussia. He serves as aide-de-camp, his runner, whatever he needs, he'll do. So his Prussian military service is where he'll make his name as a soldier. The 7 Years' War, we know it here in America as the French and Indian War. It's essentially the First World War. It's fought on 5 different continents. It was actually started by George Washington here in the colonies. At the Battle of Prague, he'll be injured, and it'll actually be a very good thing for his career because they'll send him back to the front lines as a advisor and to learn logistics and how to move troops from point A to point B. And afterwards, become the right-hand man to the prince, but through political backstabbing, he finds out, I can't move any further in the Prussian military, so I think it's time to leave. Right about this time, the Revolutionary War is kicking off in the colonies. So he first makes his way to France. In France, he meets with Ben Franklin. At this time, there's a big resentment against foreign officers coming over to the United States because they want a lot of money and they're not doing a lot of work. So they tell them, you're not going to get paid and they're probably not going to like you, but you can go anyway. France isn't in the war yet, but they want to help. So the French Minister of War actually recommends von Steuben to Washington. Bad choice. When he gets there, he thinks Boston's under British control, so he decides to dress all in red, and they immediately capture him and they want to hang him, and he doesn't speak any English, so he has to find a Pennsylvanian German immigrant to translate for him. He'll eventually leave to Pennsylvania, where Congress is kind of hidden out because the British has taken the capital. Basically, Congress says, we can't pay you, but if you volunteer, we'll probably give you something after the war. At this time, George Washington has settled in Valley Forge. He finds that Pennsylvanian German translator again, and he had to translate this letter, which he details all his services, and basically this is where he'll swore off any allegiance to Prussia and become basically a United States volunteer and dedicates his entire service to Washington. So General Washington will dictate that Baron von Steuben will be the Inspector General of the entire Continental Army and will be dictated with training the entire army. But the main problem was he couldn't speak any English, like I mentioned, except for he could curse in 5 different languages, which all the soldiers loved. In fact, he had to actually have 2 separate translators for his orders. He had to have a German to French translator, and had a second one for French to English for the rest of the officers to even understand him. So this is probably one of my favorite quotes by von Steuben. He said, "With regard to military discipline, I may safely say that no such thing existed in the Continental Army." When he gets there, there's actually, the troops have run away, they've broken, they're really passionate, but as soon as the people fire on them, they run away. Before he even gets to drilling the troops, He asks for the most basic of military things, such as troop numbers, supply numbers, how many muskets do we have, how many cannons, and none of the officers can actually tell him these things. And he's really mad right off the bat because of this. Another problem he faced when he gets there, smallpox is broken out, and he understands that sometimes during war diseases do break out. But then he realizes none of the soldiers, none of even the officers, except for George Washington and some of the high-ranking ones, even the basic of hygiene. Like none of them brush their teeth or even use, we're not talking elaborate baths here, but none of them even use soap. And so they're dying left and right, and there's more of them dying in the field than there are in battle, which von Steuben says it's the first thing they had to train them on. He teaches them with the bayonet and the musket. Some of these farm boys thought they could shoot at the British and break them that way. But he told them, no, you're going to run out of ammo very quickly that way. It's the bayonet charge that'll win the war. He taught discipline about all else. Famous quote, he used to carry a whip around and would whip you if you even messed up a drill. And he basically told them, it's great that you're passionate and all, but this is my army, and if you run away, I'll shoot you myself. So this is probably the biggest battle, at least in von Steuben's career, at least for him. Basically the Continental Army will capture 1,000 British soldiers, kill a couple hundred without even using a single musket ball. They won't fire a single shot. Eventually they actually used to use a bayonet charge to capture the British. And it's basically where the Continental Army starts believing in von Steuben's methods and stuff, and the officers. So a couple other battles in his career. He led the Southern Campaign along with General Nathaniel Greene and the Mountain Boys. He would lead the defense of Virginia. And probably the biggest battle overall was he led one of the actual armies at Yorktown, which is where the British surrendered to us and we won our independence. Another big thing he did was he taught the U.S. command how to demobilize safely. Well, the U.S. couldn't actually pay all the soldiers after the war, so having a bunch of armed, angry men wasn't a good idea. So he actually taught, George Washington how to disperse the army. After the war, he was granted U.S. citizenship for Pennsylvania. He served as the head of the German church in the colonies. He was granted land seized from British loyalists and operated a mill. So the biggest part is his impact of the United States military. The Little Blue Book, which he was famous for, is a book he had written and printed for every single United States soldier from private all the way up to basically drilling, hygiene, everything. It's still used today, obviously updated, but it's a tradition we carry on. Military command structure was another big one, because before that, he was actually the most experienced officer in the Continental Army, because George Washington, while it was a previous British officer, but he'd actually pretty much bought his commission. Von Steuben's the one who actually, said, even your officers better be based on your deeds and your service rather than, your wealth and your standing as a citizen. Most of our military ceremonies, such as the changing of the guard and changing of command, come from Baron von Steuben. And of course, like I mentioned, hygiene. That's even today, if you're in battle, soldiers are still at least at the minimum required to brush once a day. So basically his impact, he's probably the most famous German American, especially in the early times. He fostered early relations between the different German states and the United States. And then every year they hold a parade in his honor across the United States, the German-American Steuben Parade. If you've seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, that big parade he dances in is the Steuben Parade. So that's pretty much it. And if you have any questions, I'll take them now. But.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I learned something.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, I don't have an intelligent question to ask.
Very good.